Hello. In this video I'd like to share my views as to why it's so incredibly difficult to find normal people to be friends with, wherein normal would mean the traditional definition of friend on whom you could rely, who never lies to you, with whom you could genuinely do things together, and you could definitely rely on them that they mean the best for you. You have all kinds of relationships these days, and I think the only one I'd like to concern myself with will be the true friendship as defined here. So it's very difficult to find people who would actually be loyal, who would actually mean well for you, who would never lie to you. It's difficult. And my explanation to illustrate all this would rely on a scale ranging from one's openness when in social settings. By this I mean a scale which starts at the extreme of one being extremely closed and very oblivious to their surroundings, ranging all the way to being extremely open and be superposing of themselves on the surroundings. Those are two extremes. The first person is a pushover. The first person allows anybody to walk all over them for whatever reason. Maybe they don't feel anything, who cares? But basically, at the end of the day, if you put them together with someone who's more aggressive, they will just follow suit. If they were to be assimilated to a metaphor of a train and a wagon, the engine would be somebody else and they will be the wagon. Wherever the engine goes, the wagon follows. So that's this person. At the other end of the extreme, we would have more of a narcissistic kind of person who, no matter what, aims and intends to superimpose themselves onto the surroundings so that they work for them. And I would say that the definition of a good person, or a person who really is able to provide all the offerings which are required by a true friendship, that is like never lie, never cheat, mean the best for the other person, be fun to be around, but also be a good listener, has to be centered on the scale somewhere around the center. And this is very difficult. This is a difficult thing to do. You have to straddle between the two extremes. You have to listen to the other person, but you can't be too much of a bore. So you have to also be a bit more aggressive in order to put your views across. But it's a lot of mental processes going on. It's not just one of the extremes where you can just like sort of create one mode of being and just stick by it. So this person who never talks to anybody, who always is afraid to express their opinion when in social settings, this person will never be as good a company as a person in the center because they're just too passive. They expect you to deliver any action within the discourse. Whereas the other extreme, the person over here, would want to flood you with their nonsense or with their activities. They would just show no concern for your things so that you don't get any input. Any friendship, any communication, if it's to be efficient, effective, has to be a reciprocal activity, and one has to be both a listener and both an entertainer. It has to be, otherwise there's no dynamic. It's one-sided otherwise. And with this in mind, I would like to underpin that it's very difficult to straddle. If one makes a demand that their friends have to straddle, that means they say the person has to do a lot of activity because it's much more work than to just occupy one of the extremes. It's easy. You basically, if you're a pushover, you just allow everybody to talk. You have no demands. You just say, whatever you offer, I'll accept. And the other person says, oh, whatever you offer, which isn't supportive of me, I disapprove of, and I just will forget about your existence, and I just want to only listen to people who will support my cause. So those are two extremes, but there's no thinking required. Those are just two modes of being which require maybe some thought in the beginning, if at all. Maybe one was raised into this sort of thinking, but there's no active cognitive process going on. Whereas in the center, on the scale, you have to think. And as such, it's very difficult. So if one wants to find people like this, it's, I don't know, 1 in 100. Most people, as I came to think, are more happy if they don't have to think. They're much more happy if they somehow feel like everything's okay, but they don't really feel the need to provide quality company to the other person. So that's the first point I'd like to make here. And that is also another thing. If you have friends, it's obviously not clearly apparent if you meet them for the first time whether they are on this extreme or this extreme, because as some person once said, some famous person obviously, that every person is an actor of sorts. We are all actors, we are all lying to each other basically, as far as our social persona is concerned. And as such, since everything is faked, they are basically pretending to be better than they really are. So if somebody is really narcissistic or is of the type who likes to superimpose on others, they are craving other people's admiration or attention no matter what, they're being very unempathetic, then they might be aware of this. Maybe they realized over time that they have to shut up once in a while. So if you meet somebody new, they might actually seem like they are the person in the center who you want to be friends with, because they learned that it's important not to bullshit the other person all the fucking time. But it's only if you know them for a longer period of time that you can realize where they really stand, because the horns will emerge sooner or later. Nobody can put up a charade forever. So if you have somebody who in their real core are a narcissist, but they pretend to be the person in the center, you have to constantly reevaluate every person you know and reascribe them the position on the scale to know where they really are. I think hardly anybody is going to be truly in the center. Somebody will be in the center, let's say 80% of the time, then they might also like pop here once or pop here. But I would like to say that I believe that it's the average of how they come across which counts. How they act on one evening or how they act in the beginning hardly matters, because the truth is only valid if it's unmanipulated. But since everybody is able to manipulate, or most people are, to manipulate their outward persona, especially to new people who have never seen them before, then those data aren't really reliable. So you have to go by what you've seen over a longer period of time. Now, the other extreme would be where the person would be rather timid, but then would try to learn how to be more entertaining, which is also a lie in a way. Because if you start a friendship with another person, you want it to be honest. You want to show who you really are. You want them to show who they really are, and you don't want any liars. So if you have somebody who in reality is sort of a bore, let's say, but wants to come across as this cool guy who really can deliver anything, that's also not good. I think it's less threatening than somebody who's overly narcissistic in their core, and you're to learn a bit later about their true personality after you've known them for a couple of months. But all in all, fakery is fakery nonetheless. So I think it's much better to exclude any person from your life, if you want true friends, who have always seemed that they are about the center, who both listen and both provide some juice in the conversation. If it's somebody who only a bit once in a while says something cool, but the rest of the time they are boring, they are closed, they are not willing to interact. And if it's somebody who only once in a while is nice, but most of the time they will try to superpose themselves over you, then this will not correspond with what I define as a quality friendship. I think it's important to allow everything to crystallize. I think it's important to know exactly where you stand. I think it's important to have everything in order and to stay vigilant all the time as to where the people on the scale stand. I don't think it's possible for somebody to pretend to be somebody they are not. Perhaps very good actors, yes, but I'm talking about regular general populace. And on that note, I'd like to say one more thing, which I think is rather gruesome, but it's definitely pertinent to this. It's these two people on the extremes who could form a very nice friendship. It's not a friendship I would want, because I think it's an abusive relationship where somebody's like the narcissistic person with all the life, and he feels the need to share their life with everybody and to admire it, and the other person who has nothing going on for them. They are mentally backward, they are underdeveloped, and they, instead of actually trying to develop themselves, they just eat up every bit of nonsense this person spits out. Then these people could actually form a nice connection, because there's supply and demand. But the problem is that this person is basically one big bully, and this person is a victim and doesn't even realize it, because there's nothing in for them. There's maybe momentary entertainment. There are also people, I remember from my childhood, who saw themselves as sort of socially responsible people who thought they were doing good to people who weren't talking to anybody, to sort of pull them out, to come together with them to parties. Now, I wasn't one of them, since I think it might seem as such, but I wasn't really invited anyway. But what I'd like to say is that these people think that they are doing something good for other people by forcing them to do something which they wouldn't do on their own, which I think is not very conducive to their psychological development. But all in all, since there are two people, since they have some exchange, it feels like a friendship. But I don't think it's anyhow comparable to a friendship of two people who, on the scale, as I mentioned, would be in the center. Because this center position requires both people are mentally, acutely processing everything which is going on, whereas on the other spectrum, you would have one bullshitter loudmouth and somebody who never talks and has nothing going on in life. And that we would just take this person as a source of their happening, basically like some junkie watching TV. And the other person would basically take this other person as if a trash can for stuff which nobody really wants to listen to. So I'm convinced there are many friendships like this going on, and people genuinely believe those are good friendships. But I don't think so. I think quality friendships are very difficult to come by, and because of this reason, many of the crappy relationships emerge. Not everybody has the option, obviously, to find people who really fit them. But I would venture to say, categorically, that any friendship one should have, if it's to be a fulfilling relationship, should be that in which you could express yourself and you will get feedback, and the other party will express themselves and you will be able to provide them relevant and intelligent feedback. If this is not possible, if the other person just wants to talk all the time, or they are just never sharing anything on their own, there's an imbalance. And I would suggest to anybody in the world to pursue relationships which are of the sort which I advocate. That is, reciprocation. If that's absent, then the relationship is abusive and baseless. So that's about everything I have to say in this video. Perhaps it was interesting to somebody, perhaps not. Thanks for listening, and bye.